Do you want to master color editing in ON1 Photo RAW 2025? In this video, I'll show you how to use the color enhancer and the color balance tools to transform your photos. If you're new to ON1 Photo RAW, let me explain these two tools briefly, but you want to stick around to the end of the video to gain a deeper understanding of these two tools. With that said, I will expect you to have an understanding of the words hue, saturation, and brightness. Sometimes this is called luminance in other programs. If these are new words to you, then here are the breakdowns in a nutshell. Hue is the visible color you see: red, green, blue, yellow, etc. Saturation refers to the strength or shade of the color. Something that is not saturated appears colorless, and something with lots of saturation appears full of color. And then we have brightness, also known as luminance. This has to deal with how much light is present in the color. Increasing this field will make the color appear more bright, and decreasing this field will make the color appear darker. With the basics out of the way, let's dive into these two tools. This really breaks down into 5 different categories. The first one is opacity. The next one is going to be styles. And then we get into color, which is where the power of the color enhancer really starts to take shape. And then we have purity, which is essentially the ability to pull color from the highlights or the shadows in your image. And then we have the meat and potatoes, which is color range. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tidy this up a little bit to make it a little bit easier for us to unpack this tool, so bear with me. Okay, so I only have the sections of the tool visible that are primarily used when it comes to editing photos inside of ON1 Photo RAW, and that is the color section and the color range section. So starting off with the color section, this is pretty straightforward. If you're familiar with editing your white balance, then that's what this top portion is, the white balance picker here, as well as the temperature and the tint sliders. Now, I do have to give caution. I only recommend using this for creative effects. If you want to correct your white balance because maybe you shot it wrong in camera, my recommendation is to come over here to the develop module, go to tone and color, and then come down to this portion where you can monitor your color changing in Kelvin temperature. All right. That's extremely important because it's going to get you the most similar to what you would have been able to capture in camera if you were using a color balance card or a white balance card. Now, what you can do here, however, is make some creative effects. So if I wanted to warm up the entire image and I know that I'm doing this creatively, then I can just pull up on the warmth here and you can see how it's impacting the overall image. And that could be what you're going for. It could not be. But if you happen to make an adjustment and you want to reset just that slider, you can go over to the text of that slider, double click, and it will reset that portion for you. Now, you also have the drop down here, and I won't go through all of these, but this works relatively similar to the white balance option that you have inside of the develop module. Again, I recommend using this creatively. I would not use this on many of my images, but if you want to do it creatively, then by all means, adjust your temperature and your tint and go for it. The next sliders inside of the color section are saturation and vibrance. Now, these two are widely used, and I do recommend using these when you're working with the color enhancer. And I'm not going to go deep into detail because these work very straightforward. You can pull the saturation and you can see what it's doing to the image. And you can pull it to the left and you can see what it's doing to the image. All right. Same thing with vibrance. Everything works relatively the exact same as it does inside of the develop module. Then we'll jump over purity because, again, I don't think that that's something many people will use in their photos, but I will show how to use that later on in the video. I just want to get over some of the more basic options inside of the color enhancer before we dive into the more advanced portions. So now we come down to the meat and potatoes of the color enhancer, and this is the color range tool. Now, you can see here that there's a few options of colors that are available to me. And if I click these, you can see what happens down here in the hue, saturation, and brightness, which we discussed earlier in the video. If I click on all of these, I can change my hue, saturation, and brightness appropriate for that color. But you'll also see that I have a range slider. Now, this slider, it works as kind of a selection criteria of how much of the blues do you want to include in your adjustment. Now, I'm going to jump over to the red slider because I think that's where we're going to see this the best. And unfortunately, there isn't an overlay to kind of demonstrate how this is impacting the image. But what you can do is increase the brightness. Now, what I can do is just click this range slider, and if I pull it down, you'll see that it's including less of those reds. And as I pull it up, it's including more and more and more. And then when you get to 50%, or in this case, it's actually 0 on the screen. When you get to 0, then that is essentially just means that you are including what ON1 thinks is the balance for reds. Now, let's say I think ON1 got it wrong and there's more reds that need to be included in my red channel. Well, all I have to do is click and drag this up, and you'll see that it's starting to impact these oranges because that is the neighboring color. So essentially what this is doing is it's picking up on anything else that could be considered red. Now, this isn't a perfect way of working with it, and you definitely want to tune this to taste. 9 times out of 10, you'll probably want to leave this to 0, but explore with it or experiment with it. You may find something really unique that you can do with the range slider. And then, of course, you can just double click each of these to reset them and you're good to go. And then the last thing down here is the adjustment hue. All right. Now, this is a tool that you will find in pretty much every photo editor. The reason that the color enhancer is really powerful inside of ON1 is because you can use a mask with it. So let's say I did want to do something really creative where I make this like crazy warm, and maybe I want a more magenta tint to the overall image, but I really only want that in my flowers down here. What I could do is click on my mask. I can come over here to the drop down, and I've been using the quick selection brush for a lot of my editing lately. And what this is going to allow me to do is to select just the bottom portion of my image once it gets done analyzing the photo. Okay, so now that it's done analyzing the photo, I'm just going to click and drag a rectangle over this whole bottom portion. You can see it's selecting that. I don't need it to be perfect for this example. I'm just going to go ahead and accept that with a paint in option, and I'm going to hit the blue check mark. Now watch the sky and this little gazebo looking thing. Watch what happens when this mask loads into the color enhancer. So now my mask has loaded into the color enhancer, and you can see that the sky returned to its normal color, and I still have my hue, or I'm sorry, my temperature and my tint adjustment that's happening at the bottom. So if I turn this off, turn it back on, you can see what I'm doing to the flowers. And there's a lot of creative things that you can do here. And I can jump into each of these channels. So right now I'm on red. Let's say I want to saturate the reds that much more. And then there's some greens and yellows down there. So let's go to yellows, and maybe I want to push the yellows more towards green to recover some of the green that's happening in these stems. And then I can push up on the saturation and maybe even darken it down. I know I'm moving really quickly here, but I just want to give an idea of what you can do with the color enhancer and why it's so powerful to use in the effects module. That is the color enhancer in a nutshell. And I think that that's enough to know exactly how you want to start applying this to your images at a very basic level. Now, of course, if you want to go deeper, you can definitely use blend modes. You can mask this into very specific areas using different masking brushes and tools inside of ON1. The world is your oyster. You could do all kinds of things inside of ON1 with the color enhancer. Now we'll move on to the color balance tool. And this tool works a little bit differently than the color enhancer tool. Not all photo editing software have anything that are similar to this or that is similar to this, because this works on shadows, midtones, and highlights, and it allows you to add color. So one of the major differences between these two filters is the color enhancer. It works with the color that is already inside of the image based off of these channels and how well ON1 can read those colors or how prominent those colors are. You can change the hue like I did here with the yellows. That's the major difference between the color enhancer and the color balance tool. All right. The color balance tool allows me to add in colors based off of the luminance values of where I want to apply the color. So what that means in practical terms is this area here is relatively darker than this area over here. Okay. Specifically this area right in here. Okay. That's a little bit darker than this area over here. So if I wanted to add a specific color into that area, I can come into the shadow circle here. And what I like to do is hold down the shift key and pull this all the way out to the edge. So that way I can see the color as it's going across the entire image. And then what I like to do is pull this around until I find a color that I enjoy. So typically in shadows, because they're darker, you usually want a cooler tone in the shadows, completely subjective and based off of your creative thought process. You could do whatever you want. But essentially, I have the ability to adjust the exact same tools for the color that I did in color enhancer, which is hue, saturation, and brightness. So right now I'm selecting the hue, which is the color that we see visibly. Right now I'm hovered over a blue. So I'm applying a blue into the image. Now, if you look up in this general area right up here, you will see that when I hover over the color, what the hue, saturation, and brightness values are. But if you have hue, saturation, and brightness values that you would like to apply to your images, then you can very easily work to get those numbers to match as close as possible. But if not, don't worry about it. You can kind of just eyeball this. That's what I do. So the hue is the outer circle, this little circle that's colored blue. The saturation is this inner circle. Now, you have to be careful when you move this inner circle, because if you move it up or down, then it's going to change the hue. So if you found a hue, what you want to do is hold down the shift key, and then you pull this circle back and forth. And even when I move my mouse up and down, you can see I'm not actually changing the hue of my color, right? I'm only changing the saturation. So let's say I don't want as saturated of a blue across this image. I can just pull this down and stop it right there. And then if you want to adjust the brightness of this color, all you have to do is come over here to the slider underneath, and this adjusts the brightness. So I can pull this over to the left, and you can see those numbers changing up there in that little indicator above the word midtones. So I usually want to make my shadows cooler and darker. So I would probably pull it to the left. All right. Now, to counterbalance this with the rest of the image, what you would likely want to do is jump to the highlights and put a warmer tone in the highlights. So I'm going to do the exact same thing, pull this all the way out, And then I'm going to go somewhere where it's warmer. Now, I'm looking at the image to see what I want to do. And this is really more of a creative thing. Remember, color balance is adding colors into your image. It's not working with the existing colors. It's actually working with the existing luminance values, not the existing colors. You're applying new colors to your image. So this is an additive tool when it comes to colors being put into your image. All right. They don't exist there. That's very important. Whereas with the color enhancer, the colors did exist in my image already. And then what I want to do is once I find my color, I'll hold down the shift key and pull this slider down until I get somewhere where I think it's a pretty decent saturation. All right. I think right there is probably pretty good. Then I can come over here to the luminance slider and I can pull this up because highlights should be a little bit brighter. So I'll go like so. Now, it's probably hard to see the effect, but if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see how it's really changing the overall mood of the image. It's a little bit darker, a little bit cooler overall, and I like where it's kind of going. Now, to kind of balance things out even further, you can also add a color into the midtones. Now, there is really no right or wrong method. There's color theory involved here. Right now, I'm using something that's relatively a complementary color. So across from the blues are the yellow channels. And I'm not going to dive deep into color theory, but that's kind of how it works, right? If you are across the color wheel from another color, it's usually a complementary color. So whenever you have a complementary color, usually something in between those two works really well in the midtones. So I'm going to start with a pink color and see how that works. So pull this saturation slider all the way out, and pink is a little strong. So I don't want it that saturated. I'm going to go ahead and pull this saturation all the way back, and you can see how it's just warming up the image. Before it was really, really cool. Now that I've added in that pink, it has warmed up the image a little bit further. But I want to see what it looks like if I were to throw a green in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag this green or the saturation slider to the other side of the wheel in my midtones. I'm going to move this around and see. And green doesn't look that great, but I'll go ahead and pull back on the saturation just to see if that works. And, you know, that kind of works. It cools down the image even further, but I don't think that a photo of flowers should be this cool, at least in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and move this back around to the pink/red or magenta area. And I actually like that level of saturation right there. So I think I'm going to leave it as is. Let's go ahead and turn this off and then turn it back on. And you can see how it's impacting the image. Now, again, the benefit of working inside of ON1 effects is that I have access to a mask. So I can come down here and I need to activate this really quickly. Copy, click on the mask. And of course, it's not allowing me to copy it. Let's see here. Right click. There we go. Copy mask. Then we'll turn it back off. Turn on the mask for color balance, right click and hit paste. And now I'm only applying that adjustment to the bottom portion of my image. Now, if for some reason I say this is really too strong, I have access to the opacity slider. All right. And I can just fade this in however I want, just like normal business with any other filter inside of ON1 Photo RAW. All right. Now, those were the basics of the tools, and I kind of got a little bit more intermediate. And if that's all you needed to understand about the tools, then I want to say thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about ON1, consider watching other videos on the channel or hopping over to my website and learning more about getting a training call with me where I can walk you through step by step with your questions about ON1 Photo RAW. But for those of you who want to go a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more about how we can practically use this tool or these two tools in our editing workflows, then stay right here because that's what we're about to dive into. I'm going to start with the color enhancer. I'm going to go ahead and activate that. And you can see I just have the previous edits that we already made with the tool. I'm not going to actually change those because I'm going to pretend like we actually enjoy this. All right. Now, earlier I mentioned that we were going to talk about the purity sliders. So let's go ahead and activate that or unhide it. And then if I pull up on my highlights, you can see that it just starts to fade the color away. And this is where it gets really, really creative because maybe your colors are just way too impactful in the brighter areas of your image. This is a great way to come in and kind of tone that back. All right. If the brightness slider isn't helping you get the overall look that you're trying to tone back in your entire image, by the way, or at least the entire area that is being impacted by the color enhancer, you want to make sure that you want to remove the highlight or the color in the highlights of that area. But also you want to make sure that you have a good selection if you don't want this over your entire image. Right now, I can also remove the color from the shadows. And just so you understand exactly what's happening here, if I put both of these at 100%, I essentially just made my area that the color enhancer is impacting. I made it black and white. All right. So you don't want to remove all the color in most cases, but for creative effects, maybe you do want to remove the shadows, remove the color out of the shadows and then leave some of the brightness. I don't know. All right. So for our practical reasons and when this would go into a workflow, let's just go ahead and pull the highlights, pull the color out of the highlights, and then maybe a little bit out of the shadows. All right. And this is where you start to build contrast in your colors. Less saturated colors don't take as much attention from the viewer's eye. More saturated colors do take attention from the viewer's eye. And to have the ability to pull it out of the highlights and the shadows incrementally could be of value. So just keep that in your back pocket. Again, 9 times out of 10, you will leave these at 0 and never touch them. All right. But I did want to go over that because I did promise that we would go over that. Okay, so I mentioned that the color enhancer primarily works with colors that are already in your photo. So let me kind of walk you through the idea of the color enhancer and what it can do to your images if you've already used other tools that modify the color. So we're going to go ahead and hit add filter. And I'm just going to add a LUT because I think this is one of the easiest things. And one of my favorite LUTs for flower photos is inside of the summertime. And I think I will go with this one right here. All right. Now, let me turn this off and turn it back on. Turn it off, turn it on. It's right now impacting the entire image. I want to only put this into the blues. So what I'm going to do is right click here. I'm going to paste the mask that we've been working with. And because I only want it in the skies or everything that's opposite of my flowers, I'm going to right click the mask and click on invert. This is going to give me the LUT over just the sky. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see it's only impacting the sky or the upper portion of the photo. Now what I'll do is minimize that, grab a color filter or color enhancer, I'm sorry, which is a filter. And then I'm going to come over to the blue channel. And right here, I'm going to, because this is over the LUT filter, all right, it's going to impact the entire image right now because I don't have a mask, but because it's over the LUT filter, I'm going to impact the colors that I've already added with that LUT. So you kind of have to pay attention to when you add in the color filter because it's working with existing colors. So because I know I don't want to impact the colors down here, I'm going to right click, hit paste into this new color filter, or a color enhancer. And then I'm going to invert that. So essentially, this color enhancer is now only impacting the exact same areas that my LUT is impacting, right? So what I can do is I can pull up on the saturation. You can see what's happening to the sky. Or if I wanted to, I could change the hue, and I probably would not want to do that, but maybe the LUT made things like too dark and I want things to be a little bit brighter because it's a spring image in the blues. So I can pull up on my brightness, and then I can also come to my aquas and do the same thing. And now I have a little bit of a brighter look, but this LUT, it does add in a little bit of flare to the overall image because it's got the color that I want. Right now, you could do a whole lot more with this, but I just kind of wanted to give that as a general idea. If there are already color treatments to your image, then you want to pay attention to where the color enhancer sits in your effect stack, right? Because the effect that's on the top is going to impact every effect that's down below. And that's why masking becomes very, very critical in getting your look right into the places of your image that you want the effect to go. Now, let's go ahead and clear this out real quick. And we're going to take a look at when the color balance tool may be the better option to apply to your image, or when you should probably consider applying it. And for what it's worth, all of the methods that I'm showing are completely subjective because you, as the editor, have free range and control over making your images look the way that you want them to. All right. I'm just giving suggestions here and ideas. I want you to go and explore and figure out how it best works for your images. So the color balance, let's go ahead and I'm going to turn off the color enhancer. And in fact, I'm actually going to turn off the color balance as well. Better yet, let's just reset the entire effect stack. All right. So first thing that I'm going to do is come over here to my filters, my presets, and I'm going to go find a preset that's going to make this photo look really, really odd. And that's okay. Right. So I have a preset pack here from ON1 Spring Color Pop. I'm just going to go ahead and select one. It doesn't really matter. I just want to add in something so that way I can demonstrate where this goes in your workflow. So this could really simulate you doing exactly what I just did, clicking a preset, adding effects into the effect stack. Or you went through the entire process of adding in your effects, and then you're ready to figure out a final color grade. All right. Because maybe this is close, but not quite what you were expecting. So I'll hit add filter, and I will place the color balance over the entire image. Now, again, this is going to impact every aspect, every pixel in my image. I could mask this. I could do all kinds of stuff. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the shadows and I'm going to cool them off like I normally do. And then I'm going to take my highlights and I'm going to warm them up, something similar to that. And then I may even double warm the highlights just because this is a spring photo. That is entirely way too strong. So I'm going to come over to my opacity slider. I'm going to pull this down. Now, again, the benefit of using ON1 and using filters is that you have a mask. I don't really care to have this over my entire image. I really only want it down here in this area. All right. Now, you've seen how I masked it in before, but I could use any of the masking tools. So I'm going to come over here to my drop down and I'm going to use the gradient mask. And I'm just going to grab the vignette tool, click one time to actually activate that. It's now applying everything outside of my vignette. I don't want that. So I'm going to click up here where it says shape, and I'm going to change that to edges. So now it's inside of my vignette. I can check that by hitting the letter O to take a look at my mask overlay. You can see anywhere that has white, the effect is applying. Anywhere that it's black, the effect is not applied. I'll hit O to close that, and I'm just going to reshape this to fit the area. So we'll go ahead and shrink that in just like so, and maybe even do something a little bit like this. All right. So now if I turn this off and turn it back on, it's actually very, very mild. So I'm going to just go ahead and pull that up all the way, and then we'll turn it off, turn it back on. And you can see that the greens in here, they get a little bit more yellow. Maybe that's not what I want. Maybe it is what I want. I just wanted to really show you where this kind of fits in, at least in my opinion, in a workflow. You could get way more creative, such as you could paint in color grades with brushes. So if you're like, you know what, I don't like the way that this petal looks, and I want to make this petal look very different than all the other ones, I'm going to go ahead and hit reset on the mask. I'm going to invert this mask so it's not showing up anywhere. I'm going to hit the letter B on my keyboard, which is going to give me my brush tool, and then Shift X so I'm on paint in. And then I'm just going to paint over this one little petal or one flower, whatever, right? And now, again, this is the power of masking. I have essentially made a selection of just that flower, and I have applied my adjustment to just that flower. Hitting the letter O, you can see what that looks like. It's not a very prominent adjustment, but if I were to take the highlights and turn them green, and turn this in the midtones green as well, you can see how it's adjusting just that flower and nowhere else. But maybe I want to make it more orange. I could do all kinds of stuff. Maybe even increase the luminance on all of these, and I could just go to town with creative ideas of adding in this color balance. You can just see what it's doing to the image. Really, the sky is the limit when it comes to masking in color adjustments, or any adjustment for that matter. I wanted to give some ideas of the color balance versus color enhancer, how you can use it on your images, and hopefully you found some value in the content. If you did, be sure to smash that like button. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. If you got questions, I want to see them down in the comment section below. You can also reach me over at my website. And if you want to learn more about using ON1 Photo RAW in your own personal workflow, consider signing up for a training call. The link for that is in the description box below. And of course, if you want to save some money when you purchase anything over at the ON1 website, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. I do make a small commission, but that's at no extra cost to you. So until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.